Hi everyone, I'm Garrett, and welcome back to another piece of Game Master advice. Today we're talking encounter design, and I'm going to give to you a kind of travel encounter that I've used many times over the years with great success that can either be used to kick off an adventure, or it can be used as a sort of travel encounter as your own party journeys through an area of wilderness. As well as looking at how to run this encounter, which I'm going to call Attack from Below. I'll also sort of go through a couple of varieties and changes on it so that you can get the most out of it. And that'll help you kind of work out the best way to use it with your own group. So, with that kind of bit of a preamble ramble out of the way, let's dive into Attack from Below. Now, this encounter deals with the players being attacked by burrowing monsters. Specifically, it deals with them being attacked by ankhegs. Now, I love ankhegs. They're a kind of classic burrowing monster in D&D that resembles a sort of praying mantis. They can burrow like really quickly, bursting from the ground in an explosion of mud and soil before snatching their prey with sword-like claws and spitting acid at would-be heroes. I think probably my own first encounter with this monster like ever was while I was playing the first Baldur's Gate videos game, where the party can come across an area of farmland that is absolutely teeming with them. In Attack from Below, the setup is as follows. The party is traveling through an area of wilderness. It could be that this is like open farmland, as it is in Baldur's Gate 1, or it could be wilderness plains, prairie, scrubland, or probably even a lightly forested region. You could have the encounter happen as part of the sort of triggering of a random encounter, having prepped this earlier in case the party runs into trouble while traveling. That's often the way I do random travel encounters. Now, as the Ankhegs arrive on the scene, resist the temptation to set up the battle area if that's how you usually do combat. If you use miniatures and grids, you will need them, but not immediately. It's much more likely that the player characters will hear the kind of thunderous burrowing of the Ankhegs before the monsters actually burst from the ground and attack them. You could describe how they can feel a sort of faint vibration through the soles of their boots, which is growing more potent by the moment. Now, depending on your system, you might want to call for some sort of test or check at this point. For example, a perception check might allow the players to see the ankhegs burrowing towards the party a few hundred yards away in a kind of wave of rising earth. Reminds me of like the sandworms in June. Similarly, a nature check or just the presence of a druid or a ranger in the party might automatically reveal what they suspect is actually happening, that ankhegs are approaching. Now, once it's clear that something is coming and you've sort of communicated that wherever, whatever is approaching and is coming and where it's coming from, then it's time to sort of ask the party what their response is, give them a bit of agency, describe how the ground is visibly shaking, and if they have them, how their pack horses and such are kind of getting skittish and panicked. You need to lay out a couple of options for the party at that moment. You could explain that there's a rocky hillside nearby that they could rush to, or a set of boulders, or even just some kind of particularly sturdy looking trees. Whatever it is, convey to them the need to get off the ground until they've dealt with this threat. Again, going back to that sort of, I said earlier about the druid or the ranger, they know that whatever is coming, even if they don't know explicitly that it's ankhegs, is that what they do know is that it's probably going to be some sort of ambush predator that'll try and rise up and try and pull someone beneath the ground to eat later. This always evokes a kind of flurry of action whenever I've run this encounter. You could use a timer and tell everyone that they kind of need to state what they're doing before time runs out in order to ratchet up the panic and the tension. I find 30-second timers always work well for these sorts of situations as the players kind of all start screaming at each other about what they're going to do. Now, if you use miniatures or a kind of gridded movement or anything like that, tokens or anything like that, this is the time to crack those out and get them on the table in front of your party. Make sure that you place any objects like hills or trees or anything that they're rushing to get out of reach of the anchors. Make sure you place that just out of reach of their own movement in the first round, as that can kind of really add to the drama as they have to kind of decide whether to stand and fight or, in my experience, trample over the slower party and the smaller party members in a kind of wild stampede to escape whatever's coming. At that moment, the real fun can start as you have the kind of ankegs finally burst from the ground and reveal themselves to the party. You can describe the rending of the earth and an explosion of wet mud and battered worms and the occasional kind of terrified mole as the beasts smash from below the ground. If there are multiple ankegs, and I don't think there should be, many of them appear on the numbers appearing chart. About 3 I find is a good number. Then have one emerge practically adjacent to a party member. Do it to the poor halfling that's been like abandoned by his mates in the kind of wild panic, or your cleric who has dutifully stood and given everyone a leg up onto the rocks and now has been failing his own kind of climb test to get up. That can be really funny. So it comes to us now to discuss what we're trying to achieve with this encounter and what kind of ludic experience are we trying to capture and convey for ourselves and our players. As a travel encounter, it's unlikely that this encounter is going to have a long-lasting impact on the character's resources, depending on where they are and where they're going, especially if you're running 5e. If that's the case, then to be honest with you, it's quite likely that after this combat, the party are just going to kind of complete some sort of long rest, which will allow them to replenish some, or if it's 5e, all of their hit points. That's why, unlike a random encounter that takes place in an adventure location such as a dungeon, which are often designed to drain the party's resources and their capacity to continue any particular delve, travel encounters obviously serve a different purpose. Travel encounters are, for the most part, trying to add colour and verisimilitude to your setting. They can punctuate travel with a sense of action, or they can do what this one is trying to do, which is to provide a sense of thrill and disorientation almost through a damage spike. Damage spiking is what I call a narrative beat in your game that results in player characters either being wholly outmatched by a monster. It's why you have dragons on the random encounter table, or at the very least in a situation that provides genuine mortal peril from a threat that was kind of only partially perceivable. In dungeons, traps and ambushes kind of traditionally serve that purpose, as well as draining their hit points and their other resources. This encounter, attack from below, should be a damage spike. It's not that great of an encounter against high-level players, which are just going to charm or nuke the Ankhegs with a high-level set of spells like Fireball. But it is a really satisfying hazard to lay out for your players at lower and mid levels, and it can be used to start a campaign. Now, as the encounter progresses, I would emphasize a couple of the qualities of the Ankhegs that they have. Firstly, remember that they have a spit attack, and maybe you should have 1 or 2 of them hang back and start spitting at the party. What's going to happen is competent rangers and magic users are going to be jostling for space to kind of draw their bows and move their hands so they can cast spells and shoot back at the Ankhegs. You could have 1 or 2 of them rush forward trying to pluck the characters from their sanctuary of like relative safety while the others spew globs of acid at the party. In that sort of situation, the Ankhegs are never going to actually be killed if you think about it, because they control the space. If the monsters find themselves in mortal peril, what they're going to do is they're going to flee underground. They might re-emerge if that's the case. I like to use these like little crater markers to denote where they've dug up previously, or they might just flee the scene entirely. Now, if that's the case and they run away, the monsters do, then they might go on to like harass and attack the player characters on the following days or during the night. That can be really fun as the kind of party enters a sort of besieged mindset, even while traveling. They kind of keep an eye out for whether they're going to be attacked again. It reminds me of the classic monster film Tremors, where a kind of small community of people are set upon by giant carnivorous worms. It does mean that the only time these Ankhegs will actually be killed by the player characters is if they can dole out enough damage in like a really short amount of time, like 1 round, before the monsters kind of get wind of what's going on and retreat. Now, if your players do manage to succeed in destroying them, I'd just take another leaf out of Baldur's Gate's book and just have their chitin be harvestable so that they can haul it back to a local blacksmith and have it turned into something like armor or some other kind of cool item. Players always, in my experience, absolutely love that sort of stuff. Now, I said at the beginning of this review that I'd also give some advice on how to switch up this encounter if you do end up using attack from below. One thing that I've done is change the monster from ankheggs to land sharks, boulets. Even a single boulet is going to give all parties except the most able, like the highest level parties, a real run for their money and probably a run for their lives, let's be honest. How a boulet differs from an ankhegg is quite important, and it'll result in a kind of quite a different sort of encounter. As they lack a ranged attack, they aren't going to be hassling the party if they make it onto the rocks or like onto an area of safety. Instead, what they're going to do is circle at the bottom, waiting for the party to kind of finally come down. That situation reminds me of the opening of the classic Conan short story by Robert E. Howard, Red Nails. And in that, Conan and Valeria find themselves stuck on a large rock as a giant Komodo dragon-like monster that they call a dragon circles them from below. The pair end up finding a skeleton on that rock and realize that the last person to find themselves besieged by this monster on this rock, like in the same predicament, just ended up starving to death because they'd failed to kind of work a way out of that situation. I think that a land shark or, a couple of land sharks could easily evoke a similar sort of experience. The other significant difference in the kind of abilities and powers of a boulet is that they have this great ability to kind of launch themselves, like leap forward. If you run this encounter early in a campaign for low-level characters that are really, they are going to really struggle against a boulet, you can almost sort of, just sit back and laugh as the party trample on each other to get, higher and higher up the boulders and away from those kind of snapping jaws that are below them. Now, that just about brings me to the end of this episode on encounter design. I hope sincerely that you found this interesting, or at the very least that it provoked a kind of a bit of food for thought about your own travel encounters. Now, I've talked about how to run travel before extensively in another video. There's a link to that now in the top right if you want to watch that. Let me know in the comments below if you do try this encounter out or what you think of it, and if you do run it, how it ends up going for your party. But until then, like and subscribe, do all that good stuff. It's free. I'm Gary, and I'll speak with you again soon.